Hello guys, how are you? Well, this is the continuation of non-finite dependent clauses, the analysis of the categories in non-finite dependent clauses. The previous lesson we stopped in the analysis of two infinitive clauses and their syntactic roles two infinitive clauses can have, and in this opportunity we'll continue with the following categories in ing clauses, ed clauses, and other types of clauses. As the other day, we already covered two infinitive clauses. Let's begin with ing clauses. Well, you know that ing clauses are marked by a participle in present time. It's an ing form, and the beginning of the clause is set by this ing word. The syntactic roles that ing clauses can have are the following. The first we're going to cover is the one of the subject. Let's consider this example here. In this compound sentence, she has some odd talents and writing obituaries is one of them. One of the clauses has an ing form as the subject of the clause. And it covers this part. Sorry, let me change the size of this line. And it covers the second clause, right? Remember that whenever we have a coordinator, the coordinator is left aside from the clauses. Here we have our first independent clause. This is clause number 1. And the second clause begins with an ing form, writing obituaries. This is the subject of our second clause, right? It's placed at the beginning in the slot of the subject. And that is why we say in this case that this ing clause is acting as the subject of the whole second clause. The following category includes extraposed subject as a syntactic role, right? As in the previous category in two infinitive clauses, remember that we have an extraposed subject every time we have the dummy it being the subject of the whole clause, which can be replaced by the form in the dependent clause. It was a great pleasure talking to you. If we remove it from the clause, we can use the dependent clause, in this case the ing clause, as the subject of the whole construction. Talking to you was a great pleasure. The next syntactic role is the one of subject predicative. Remember that when we have a subject predicative or we have a clause or an element being a subject predicative every time the construction is placed after a copular verb or a linking verb. Please note that whenever we mark dependent clauses, we mark them from the subordinator onwards or from the to infinitive, the ing or the ed particle onwards. In this case, we are talking about ings. So let me mark this part over here. Here is the beginning of the dependent clause. The real problem is getting something done about cheap imports. Please note, well, here we said this is an ing participle. Please note that this construction here is not an action in progress. Be careful with that. In this example, the real problem is getting something done about cheap imports. The ing clause is giving us information related to the subject, to what the problem is. In this case, we are not emphasizing the idea in the verb, the process, or something that is done with some progression, but we are specifying what the problem is. So this ing clause acts as a participle, and it's not part of a verb phrase in progress, right? So this form is not in the continuous form. It isn't the same if we say Maria is getting ready. In this case, we are emphasizing an action that is being done with some progression, or is being done at the time of speaking. In this case, we are using a continuous form. The following syntactic role is the one of the direct object. Remember, we always mark a direct object, or we always will find a direct object every time we use a transitive verb, or we have a transitive verb in our clause. In this case, remember, we mark the ing, or the clause, dependent clause, from the ing form onwards. And what we find here is a transitive verb, right? Started what? Thinking about Christmas. Remember that direct objects always answer the question what or who from the clause. Ing clauses can also be adverbials in as regards function in a major clause. For example, here we have looking particularly well. I didn't come out of it looking particularly well. Always consider the meaning or the implied meaning in the clause. If we think of what kind of information is looking particularly well giving to us, we may say that this ing clause is giving us information related to a circumstance, right? So this ing clause will answer the question how, right? So in this case, this is an adverbial of manner. Ing clauses can also serve as complements of prepositions. This means that the ing clause in this case will be placed after a preposition complementing or giving us extra information to complete the idea of that preposition. For example, I'm responsible for drawing up the budget. In this case, our ing clause is giving us information about I'm responsible for what. So this ing clause is completing the idea of our preposition. Here you can say this is a complement of a preposition. Complement of a preposition. You can also say prepositional complement, as you wish. It's the same, right? I think I forgot to place all the previous analysis. Every time you need to analyze finite and non-finite dependent clauses, the first thing you may write is the first category, non-finite dependent clause, yes. In this case, the following category is ing clause, and then the syntactic role in here, right? I'm writing down, but it's not necessary. I will understand that you know this is the syntactic role. Complement of a preposition, or you may also say prepositional complement. If the dependent clause, in this case the ing clause, is placed after a noun, this means giving us information related to the noun. In this case, we'll have a noun post modifier. See that here we have our dependent clause headed by an ing participle. His thoroughly spoiled child being the only one in the family. Please note that being the only one in the family is extra information related to the child, right? This is our noun. It has been modified by an adjective too, spoiled. But consider in this here that all this information in the ing clause is giving us something or some idea to enlarge the meaning of our noun child. As regards the analysis, please remember first things first, non-finite dependent clause. And this is also an ing clause. We are just classifying the dependent clause in categories. And lastly, here you can say this is a noun post modifier, or you can also say noun complement. That will be the same. Noun complement, right? You can use both terms interchangeably. They are the same. Sometimes some books prefer the use of noun post modifier and some others noun complement. The book that we are following says or uses the term post modifier, right? But you can use both of them. It's no problem if you choose to use noun complement. The last syntactic rule for ing clauses is part of an adjective phrase. Remember that we'll find an ing clause with the syntactic role of part of an adjective phrase or adjective complement, that will be the same too, if the ing clause is placed after an adjective completing the idea of the adjective. This means giving us information related to the adjective. Let's see this. In here, this is our dependent clause. The town is busy, taking advantage of its first city challenge victory. Please note that we have in this example an ing clause which is placed after, or is, yes, it's using a slot after the adjective, and it's giving us information related to the reason why this city is busy, this town is busy, right? So this is a complement for our adjective in this case. So if you want to analyze this, remember non-finite dependent clause. Then this is an ing clause and is acting, or it has the function or the syntactic role of being part of an adjective phrase. You can also say here this is an adjective complement. Both terms are okay. You can use whichever you want. Well, guys, we have covered in class two infinitive clauses, and now we have covered this part of ing clauses. If you could notice this, ing clauses and two infinitive clauses are the clauses or the dependent clauses that are mostly integrated into the sentence. This means that they perform certain functions within the sentence or within the major clause. And it's not the same with ed clauses and other types of clauses as verbless clauses and supplement clauses. They perform less functions, or they are not highly integrated into the major structure of the clause. Well, ed clauses, and which are also called past participle clauses, are integrated in the clause as direct objects, adverbials, or noun post modifiers. So ed clauses can have only these three syntactic roles within the clause. Please note that not only words that are regular past forms, I mean ed words, are the ones included in ed clauses. Please remember to include or to pay attention also to irregular verb forms. Let's consider the first syntactic role, which is the one of the direct object. You'll find ed clauses with functions of direct objects whenever you find examples of or sentences which include the causative. The causative is the structure we use to express something that we have arranged for someone else to do for us. So remember that this structure is always used with have plus the direct object plus the verb in past participle form, and this past participle form has a passive meaning. So every time we find an example with the causative, we'll have an ed participle form or an ed clause as the direct object of the verb have. Here we mark from the direct object, including the ed word. In this case, it's an ed word. Remember that it can be also another form of an irregular verb form, right? And the way you will you will analyze this, it'll be, as always, non-finite dependent clause. In this case, the following category is the one of an ed clause, right? And the syntactic role will be the one of a direct object. Ed clauses can also serve as adverbials. And see that in this example they found him worn out by travel and exertions. We'll see firstly that this ed clause begins with an ed clause which includes an irregular verb form, worn, right? In this case, this ed clause gives us information related to the way this person was found. So this ed clause also gives us information related to how this person was found. So this is also a manner adverbial as in the previous example. How are you going to analyze this? As always, non-finite dependent clause. Then I'm going to move that. Also in the category of ed clause, and finally adverbial. It's not necessary for you here to include what kind of adverbial it is, right? We're going to consider adverbials on unit 11, not now. So adverbial, it's okay up to there. And the last syntactic role for ed clauses is the one of noun post modifier. Let's mark here again. See that the ed clause begins with an irregular verb form. So please consider that when you analyze your examples. This was Bach's only work written for 5 instruments, right? In this case, this ed clause is giving us information related to the type of work. Here, remember, this is our noun, work, and the ed clause enlarges the meaning of the noun in our clause. So it's a noun post modifier. It's giving us extra information related to the work. So again, non-finite dependent clause in the category of ed clause, and in here again, as in the other or as in the previous analysis, we can say this is a noun post modifier, or you could also say this is a noun complement. Any of them will be okay. And now let's consider the last category. We'll talk a bit about verbless clauses and supplement clauses. So finally, let's consider these other clauses, which are verbless clauses and supplement clauses. These two types of clauses, verbless and supplement clauses, are the least integrated into the structure of the clause or the sentence, so they do not perform specific functions within the structure of the clause, or the major clause of the sentence, and they rather give extra information that is considered background information. They sometimes, or most of the times, they can be removed from the clause without altering the meaning of the whole construction. Maybe you will find in some books or some grammarians include verbless clauses within the structures of or the category of non-finite clauses. In fact, this book categorizes in isolation because we cannot say a clause is finite if it doesn't have a verb, and that is what happens in verbless clauses. There's an absence or there's a lack of a verb, right? Well, let's mark this verbless clause. Though injured. The rescuers found the boy, though injured, fully conscious. Firstly, let's see that this idea is placed in between commas. So this is extra information that is not essential in the clause. And what I want you to check here is that this is a verbless clause because in here we have ellipses of subject and verb, right? So ellipsis in here will be would. Though he was injured. Who is he? The boy. Though he was injured, he was fully conscious. So as this is a verbless clause because it doesn't have a verb, we cannot categorize that into non-finite clauses, at least for this book that we are using. So every time you find a verbless clause, so a clause that may have a subject and a verb, but it's elided or it's been eliminated for the purpose of ellipsis, in that case you will have a verbless clause. And the way that you're going to analyze that, it will be just verbless clause. It's not necessary here for you to include the first category because we are saying that this book doesn't use verbless clauses within non-finite clauses, and in this case, this verbless clause is giving us extra information and is not performing any function within the major structure of the clause. Oh, what is that? Finally, we have supplement clauses. Supplement clauses are also background information that are peripheral types of adverbials. They serve just to give us information related to the context, but in fact they are not specifying a circumstance or a linker or the speaker's attitude. So they serve only to give background information. As in verbless clauses, they are majorly presented in between commas or in between a comma and a full stop, as in this example. She gazed down at the floor, biting her lip. So biting her lip here is our supplement clause, which gives us extra information. But if we remove this from the clause, this information is not essential. Regarding the way that you're going to analyze this type of clause, as in the example of verbless clauses, the only thing that we are going to mention is that this is a supplement clause. Supplement clauses generally are ed or ing clauses, but as they are not integrated into the clause performing a function, we are not going to include this clause, this type of clause in ed clauses or ing clauses. We're going to leave that alone as verbless clauses with any other categorization. Well, guys, this is it for the analysis of categories and syntactic roles in non-finite dependent clauses. I hope this helps you out with the analysis that you have to do, you must do in classroom. And if you have major doubts or if you have some questions regarding this, if you have some queries, please text me so we can sort your doubts out. See you soon. Bye.